I think it's a good regulation because it stops vehicles from getting into a state of disrepair. However, remember that a roadworthy is really a visual inspection around the VIN number, engine number, the bodywork of the car.
For a lot longer. The cost of living continues to rise. Of course, following an increase in interest rates by the South African Reserve Bank Monetary Policy Committee in September, an additional 75 basis points, and that was the fifth consecutive increase since November 2021. And of course, that the carpool in the country is also aging, with a general slowdown in new vehicle sales, compounded by the fact that in South Africa there is no enforcement of periodic testing. So there's interesting stuff happening on that front. And George Mienie is the CEO of AutoTrader. He joins me on the line to look at some of those matters and more. Hello, George. Welcome.
Thank you, Clarence. Really good to be here again.
George, what does the cost of living pressure mean for us motorists and for prospective car buyers?
Well, Clarence, I think it has a couple of pressures. And, from AutoTrader's data, remember, we sit on 12 million visits a month, 80 million pages open. So we know what people are shopping for all the time. And we've just launched a product to sell cars for consumers as well. So we sit squarely in the middle of the buy and sell transaction. And the reality is, we've seen a very buoyant used car market for the last couple of years, specifically during and post the pandemic. And the reason for that is all of the supply chain shortages and the silicon chip shortages plaguing new cars, which has forced consumers to buy used cars. So the encouraging thing is that consumers have still been buying cars, and we've seen an increase in that activity actually over the last couple of years. However, I think the reality and the rubber hits the road when you start looking at interest rate increases, the cost of finance, housing cost increases, all of the other ancillary costs around the vehicle start to increase. And then what essentially begins to happen is the consumer says, oh, well, as a result of that, I don't really need to replace my car now. In our data, we haven't started to see that yet, but I predict that it's coming. I think this used car bubble might burst in about 12 months.
So the used car bubble bursts, and then you're going to see an uptick in new car sales. Is that what you're saying?
No, not necessarily, because we haven't sorted out the supply chain issues and the silicon chip shortage issues yet. Okay. But the economic pressures on the consumer is going to potentially cause consumers to hold on to their cars longer, not want to replace, not be able to afford to replace. And in that vein, there will be less demand potentially for used cars. New cars have got its own problem, but less demand for used cars, and as a result of less demand for used cars, prices of used cars start to fall. We've seen a very buoyant used car price inflation over the last couple of years, so that has to come to an end at some point. Used car prices begin to fall, and retailers start to have thinner margins on those used cars, which means that the whole used car economy starts to slow down.
Or a buyer's market for that matter is formed. So what you're saying is this interest rate hike season that we are in is only really going to be felt after a year afterwards?
Well, from the data that we've seen over, I've been with AutoTrader now for almost 20 years, and it's never binary, it's never immediate. If you look at 2008, very similar thing happened. I read the articles about the 9-year nine-year-old car park on average. The average age of a vehicle on AutoTrader is 5 years old, and it's been like that for the last 2 to 3 years. And I've just checked now in August, which is the last data set that I have, and it is still 5 years. So we haven't started to see that. And consumers react quite quickly, but it does take a couple of months for that to come through the system. We're still seeing finance deal increases in the region of 34% for increases in new finance deals, and about 5 to 5.5% increases in the number of deals in used cars. So you can see there's a little bit more buoyancy in the finance market for new, and not so much in used. And all this could be a recipe for a slowdown starting.
Sure. What we are seeing, or what people are suggesting, is that people are selling their extra vehicles, or buying older cars, and yeah, because of struggling with maintenance costs. Essentially, the pressure on households are significant. So they're getting rid of the extras. They are holding on to cars a little longer, and they making use of cheaper maintenance options. Are these some of the trends that you're witnessing on your side as well?
I would say all of those are plausible from the data, except one thing, and that is selling their additional costs. We've actually seen a reduction in listings on the platform versus for the last 2 to 3 years. We've actually seen we saw an increase in the number of people listing vehicles, or should I say the number of listings. So a reduction of listings on the platform for me shows that there is a slower movement of vehicles through the system, which means that people are more holding on to their cars than they are trying to flog them.
Let's go to Kate Elliot. Kate Elliot joins us via Zoom. Kate, I quoted you a little earlier. You mentioned in a Business Tech article that the cost of living crisis is driving up the risk of poor road safety as consumers buy older cars and struggle with maintenance costs. Do you want to just elaborate on that quote?
Hi, morning, Clarence. Thanks for having me. So I mean, if you can't pay for bread and milk and your bond, you're going to start perhaps skimping on your maintenance every year. You might be looking for cheaper options, or skipping doing your annual maintenance altogether.
Kate Elliot is the CEO of Right to Repair. In this article, you also say that the carpool in the country is aging with a general slowdown in new vehicle sales, compounded by the fact that in South Africa there is no enforcement of periodic testing. Do you think that should come with the fact that our fleet is aging?
Yeah, of course. I mean, older cars are more dangerous cars. I mean, if they are maintained well, they generally are. They can do very well for a long time. But newer cars obviously are safer.
Are you saying we are seeing knee-jerk reactions from consumers, and maybe there's a more considered take that we need to have on this matter?
I don't know about knee-jerk. It's just that when people are sitting down doing their budgets, they're going to make sure that they've got food on the table and a house to live in, and perhaps they're going to try and make sure they have a vehicle, but they might say, oh, well, is it really necessary to replace those tires? Whereas in better times, they might replace them straight away, and same thing for maintenance.
Also, part of this Business Tech article where you are quoted, it says amendment in 2014 to Regulation 138 of the National Road Traffic Act was meant to prescribe that vehicles older than 10 years be tested every 2 years. However, to date, this has not been enforced, and vehicles are still only required to have a statutory roadworthy test on change of ownership. So while it's in the Act, it's not being enforced. Is that what you're saying? And statutory roadworthy test on change of ownership only applies.
That's correct. Yes.
It doesn't make sense. If it's an act, why is it not enforced?
So that act, it's an amendment to the regulation, and it hasn't been enforced yet. It hasn't come into effect yet.
Okay. So we're chatting with Kate Elliot, the CEO of Right to Repair. We've also got George Mienie, CEO of AutoTrader, on the line. Let's go back to George Mienie. George, could one go as far as saying that cost of living crisis is driving up the risk of poor road safety? I want to put that question to you as well.
I think that's a very loaded question in terms of assuming that people would drive cars in the state of disrepair. So I don't have any evidence to support or refute, an aged vehicle being in a state of disrepair, because it is very possible to keep a vehicle in the state of really good roadworthiness, even to the point of 7, 8, 9 years old. It does go without saying, though, that a vehicle does deteriorate over time if it is not repaired. So this act, or I think it's Regulation 138, does make for the check on a vehicle to make sure it's roadworthy every 2 years after a vehicle is 10 years old. And all the minister hasn't done is put down an implementation date. So he's got to give a date when this starts. It's the only thing he hasn't done. Why he hasn't done it, I have no idea. I think it's a good regulation because it stops vehicles from getting into a state of disrepair. However, remember that a roadworthy is really a visual inspection around the VIN number, engine number, the bodywork of the car, to see that there's no visual damage, the interior of the car, to see that the instrument cluster and the workings of the car in terms of speed, speedometer, etc. are working, the lights, the windows and windscreen, the wheels and tires, that they're fitted with manufacturer standards, the suspension, they do suspension check, and then they check for leaks in the powertrain. That doesn't mean that there aren't any deeper issues in the car. So a roadworthy check is really a roadworthy check by an entity that can look at the car from the outside. It doesn't mean that the car isn't going to go and stand still in the next 700 kilometers.
We're going to come back to this conversation. There's a couple of WhatsApp messages in. Let's take a listen.
Hi, Clarence. Cost of living is so much. You have the amendment in this act that your vehicle has to be checked. Clarence, what are you going to find is so many people that cannot afford is just going to ride these vehicles and take it by chance. If one looks at it into the future, because people can't go for roadworthy tests every time if finances are already so bad. So what would be the ultimate thing to do? Is there a different solution in any way?
That's a question I'm going to put to our panel in a short while. Let's take a listen to another one. Oh, it's only that particular. Kate Elliot, I wanted to turn to you, CEO of Right to Repair. Kate, I think your activism has contributed to the fact that maintenance costs have actually come down. So too, the price of parts for cars. And that's recent kind of regulation. Is it self-regulation that has enabled more competition to benefit the consumer? Is Kate out there? I think we've lost Kate Elliot, CEO of Right to Repair. But I'm gonna put that to you, George Mienie, CEO of AutoTrader. It looks as if the consumer is generally kind of better off now with the new regime in place. Did that come about through self-regulation, or was that a government process of intervention?
I think it's largely self-regulation, Clarence, and the reason I say that is, remember the right to repair were recommendations by the Competitions Commission. They, to my knowledge, haven't been written into law. And a lot of OEMs and manufacturers, as well as independent repair shops, have taken on board these principles, which means that there's more competition, which means that prices should fall. So it should be theoretically cheaper to maintain your car now than it ever has been as a result of the right to repair. So I would say, to answer your question, it's mostly self-regulation. People, are jumping on board.
Kate Elliot, CEO of Right to Repair, back on the line. I was talking about how more affordable maintenance of motor vehicles are, and I think a lot of that has to do with the kind of activism that you've shown in this particular industry. It benefits us, this aftercare kind of needs that we have in relation to our motor vehicles, does it not?
Yes, that's correct. It should bring down the prices of services, or at least keep them in check, and also raise the level of service provided, because now the industry is governed by normal market forces where competition is able to thrive. So if you provide a good service at a good price, then your business is going to do well. This generally raises the level of standard and lowers the level of cost. And so it should be of benefit to all motorists, whether you are servicing a vehicle that is in warranty or whether you're servicing a vehicle that is out of warranty. The standard and price should be better.
Let's go to George Mienie, CEO of AutoTrader again. George, you were touching on roadworthy inspections there in an earlier comment. Just what are the requirements again, so people understand that, and maybe give us an indication around the cost implications of roadworthy inspection?
Clarence, first of all, roadworthy inspections are a outward visual inspection and a very light touch inspection of the vehicle from a shock absorber point of view. So, they verify things like the VIN number, engine number, to the eNatus system to make sure that the vehicle is legitimate. They look at the bodywork and the presentation of that bodywork to see the integrity of the bodywork and the chassis from an exterior point of view. They look at the interior of the car, the odometer, speedometer, make sure that's in working order, the seats, the seat belts, make sure those are secure from a safety point of view. Lights, from a safety point of view, they check the function of the lights. Windows and windscreen, check for no cracks, no loose windows, etc. And wheels, tires, and brakes, they test the brakes and make sure the car can stop, and they check the tires, make sure the tires are fit for purpose and are at manufacturer standards, as well as a suspension check, make sure there's no leaks, make sure the suspension doesn't have too much play, and then the powertrain. They have a look underneath the vehicle, make sure there's no leaks and any visible damage to the transmission or the engine. And these roadworthies cost a couple of $100, and really it's just an inspection of the vehicle. Like I said earlier, it doesn't mean that the vehicle doesn't have underlying issues.
George, we're going to have to wrap it up there, but thank you for your insights. It's appreciated.